Hello and welcome to today's webinar as part of Centre UB. So Centre UB is the National Training Centre for Research Excellence in Understanding Behaviour. I'm the Training Director, Vicky Goodyear, and today I'll be leading the webinar with our special guest. The webinar will be 30 minutes and then there will be time for Q&A. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions through the chat function or through the Q&A, and we'll be taking the questions at the end. So it's now a pleasure to introduce our speaker and the topic for today. So this is about educating for a sustainable future. And we're joined by Professor Julia Myatt, and she's the Academic Director for Sustainability Education at the University of Birmingham and a Professor in Collaborative Education. As part of the senior education team, Julia coordinates and promotes the central place of subject-specific and interdisciplinary education in sustainability and climate awareness across the university. So I'm sure we'll hear more about the topic of today, and I'll hand over to Julia. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vicky. Hi, all. Thank you for joining. I will share my slides. Fabulous. Can you all see those? I'm assuming so. Yeah. Oh, there we go. So, first of all, I just want to share a bit about me and my background, because I'm always very conscious that my actual title kind of doesn't really say anything about my background, or you may assume that I'm actually in educational research, which actually isn't the case. So my research background is in animal behaviour and anatomy. So I used to look at social behaviour, movement, ecology in orangutans, large African carnivores, which is obviously very different to what I'm talking to you about today. So 12 years ago, I made the switch into an education focus role here at Birmingham. And through the past decade, I've become more of an expert in the realm of interdisciplinary education. So working with liberal arts and natural sciences programs, developing new interdisciplinary degree programs, and taking very collaborative approaches. Often this was segueing into the sustainability spaces, because of course you can't consider sustainability without being cross-disciplinary. And that led to eventually the role that I'm in now as Director of Sustainability Education for the university. So from that sense, you might get some of this bleeding through into what I'm talking about today, particularly the behaviour aspect. Oh, apologies. So first thing I want you to think about, just 1 minute, when I say the word sustainability, what does that word mean to you and what does it conjure up? Just hold that in your mind. Just what's the first thing that comes into your mind? Everyone will probably have a different word or a different feeling or a different image that they had in their mind. Was your feeling or image positive or negative? And that's often really interesting. And does that reflect how you're feeling today? It may have been a really positive image. It may have been something like this beautiful wildflower garden that you can see. Or it may have actually been something more negative, something about how we're damaging the environment. It could have been something completely different. But what I want you to start doing is thinking about how your feelings and how even the mood that you're in at a particular moment can change how we feel about this subject area. And that's really important. So as I go through today, what we're going to focus on, first of all, is a brief introduction to what sustainability is and how we address it at the university and the key global challenges that we're facing. I'm then going to briefly talk about the role of education to ensure a more sustainable future. And we'll be talking about education from the perspective of all ages, from school children up to lifelong learning. In particular, I'm going to focus on climate emotion and how this is something we all need to be considering when we train in this space. And finally, I'm going to touch briefly on enabling behaviour change and the power of people. The global environmental challenges are the ones I'm going to start with. And this is often where people's brains tend to go first. They think about the environmental challenges. So the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, and also pollution. So rising global temperatures leading to the loss of human, non-human animal habitats, displacements, food insecurity, extreme weather events. Biodiversity loss is often at the top of our list, considering the impact we're having on ecosystems. And then air pollution, water and plastic pollution as well, how they impact on both ecosystems and human health. But then we'll have a look at these ones as well, the social and economical impacts. Depending on your background, these may be the ones you think of first, and that's something I also want you to consider. Which of these crises that I'm mentioning across both tables was one that came to mind for you first? Because everyone, again, will come at it from a different perspective. But here we've got global inequalities, healthcare inequality, wealth, resource disparity, climate migration, inequality in gender and race. We have economic instability, supply chain disruptions, financial instabilities, health threats, consideration of future pandemics, the mental health crisis, and increased risks due to some of the environmental crises in these spaces around health. And then finally, there's also technological challenges, cybersecurity threats, AI, the use of AI and its ethics and regulation, and responsible use. And then also the digital divide. So there's so many topics that can fall under sustainability. And I think that's often one of the first challenges. When people say you're going to train in sustainability or you want to consider sustainability, you have to think which aspect and how you're going to approach that. At the University of Birmingham, we cover this using probably the most well-known statement, which comes from the Brundtland Report in 1987. It's one of the broadest definitions. So for our community, we consider the sustainable use of our available resources and living in a way today that provides for the needs for us all to live a happy and healthy life without preventing future generations to do the same. Now, obviously wrapped into that are all those aspects of looking after the planet, because without looking after the planet, you can't achieve these. But it is potentially one of those phrases that is missing from the statement. But that captures everything that I've just mentioned. Commonly, when you start talking about sustainability, there will be a mention of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are shown here, goals 1 to 17, and they are often a really useful framework for sustainability in the sense that they are globally recognized, well understood, and do provide a clear overview of all the different aspects. The challenge with them, though, and part of this comes from even the format that they're presented in, as you can see here with the boxes, is the fact that they promote almost a tick box exercise. They allow people to segment them off and think, well, I'm going to tackle that one or that one, when actually the way the development goals were created was to be considered holistically. They've got to be considered in terms of how they interact with one another, how they link, how you can't consider one without the other. So that's something to bear in mind. One of the frameworks that we particularly use here is more focused on the 3 pillars of sustainability. So the 3 pillars are focused on the environmental, the economical, and the social aspects of sustainability. You cannot have a sustainable solution without considering all 3. And you can see on the diagram the boundaries between the two, consider whether it's livable solution, viable, and also fair. Again, with this, when you're looking at it, most people will naturally probably sit in one of the 3 pillars. But the key thing to do whenever you're talking about sustainability or wherever you're considering sustainability is, how does this intersect with the other pillars? Who could I talk to that might have expertise in one of the other pillars? How are we ensuring that we're covering all of them? At the bottom, you'll see just 2 other frameworks that I just wanted to highlight. The first one is Soil Soul Society from Satish Kumar in the early 2000s. The reason we flag this one is because it's actually a really nice one that focuses on sustainability from a relationships perspective. So soil is about our relationship with nature and the planet. Soul is about your relationship with yourself. And then society is about relationship with others. And that's quite a nice way to frame things. The other one I wanted to mention, because this is much more frequently used in the business world, is people, planet, profit. Purely because it's the 3 Ps, so it's often talked about, or the triple bottom line. Fundamentally, they're all trying to achieve the same thing. They're all trying to think about how we consider the interrelated connections and how we can solve these challenges for people, the planet, but also bearing in mind that we do need to consider the economical aspects as well. That's a brief overview of how we can think about sustainability. Now I'm going to focus more on the role of education, and much more linked to my role now is thinking about how we can train both the next generation, so thinking about students coming through in universities, but also importantly, how we can train people currently in the workforce, how we are changing potentially the way people think about approaches that they need to take in their workplaces, how you might want to consider which route to go. So here I am going to initially focus on young people, and young people today will have to live with the impacts, both physically and emotionally, of the climate crisis for the rest of their lives, despite contributing very little proportionally to the climate crisis. And that's a really key element here. We're asking the next generations essentially to take on the issues and the challenges that we've caused. And I think we really need to consider how we can put them in the best place possible to be able to tackle these challenges. So the role of education is to equip the next generation with the skills to be able to understand and tackle the global challenges we face today. And this is the key bit I've just mentioned, upskill the current workforce or older generations. We need to be very mindful that it is not just up to the younger generation to solve these problems. How we can do this can take different methods. We need to think about climate awareness and individual actions and behaviours in everybody. And that's where the base level of training is required. So to ensure we have climate conscious citizens of the future. Then there's obviously space for much more specialist skills and knowledge. So people that may be contributing to the global challenges through their technical knowledge, their skill set that they have, how they bring that together from a different disciplinary perspective. And then finally here, I've highlighted the importance of inter and transdisciplinary practice. I'm not going to go into the different definitions today of what we mean, but fundamentally, this is where disciplines in higher education need to be more effective at working with external stakeholders, communities, global citizens to develop solutions together. And it's important. That's not just about transfer of knowledge, but it's about developing the knowledge together. And that's the space in which we're going to create sustainability leaders for the future. So I've created this diagram which sort of encapsulates it all, showing that initially your education in this space will start off as a child, from your parents, from your schooling. You may or may not then have further education or higher education. Then employers, and employers still have a huge role to play to ensure that education in this space continues, particularly at the moment where we're playing almost a lot of catch up because people coming through, people who've been through the school system may not have had any awareness or learning about this. And then, of course, that all falls under the lifelong learning. So it's something we should never stop learning about. We'll always be changing, and therefore we need to consider how we can best tackle that. So that's the sort of framing of education in this space. But where does climate emotion come in, and how does this impact what we do? So 70% of children are worried about the world they're going to inherit, and 60% believe it's actually already impacting their mental health. A lot of the time, we can feel powerless and out of control, and people tend to be scared of things that they can't control. The heat waves and storms really worry me because they are a clear sign of the consequence of inaction or action by humans. That's one of the quotes from the survey. And from personal experience, I know working and talking to my students, they are making decisions based on where they think the planet will be, or having to make hard decisions about whether to have families, what jobs to take, whether they're going to travel or not, based on the challenges that we've essentially put to them. And of course, that's resulting in a lot of feeling. Often this has been referred to in the past as climate anxiety, but actually more recently people have started to expand out from anxiety and say it's not just about anxiousness about the environment or the future or climate change. It comes with a whole wheel of emotion. And here you can see this is the climate wheel of emotion. I would say actually it's also missing quite a big one, which is apathy. Sometimes all these feelings are so overwhelming that what you can see is actual shutdown or people who don't want to engage at all because it's too much to engage. Equally, there's a lot of positivity on this wheel. So the way we frame sustainability can really change how people feel. And you will be feeling in different ways at different times of day. We know how we feel if we've read something in the news. We may feel anger or frustration, but then if we read about a solution, maybe we can move into the hope or empowerment. And that's what we need to think about if we're ever talking about sustainability. You need to consider the emotions of the people in the room, but also how you can maybe help them through some of the different emotions that they will be feeling. How do we navigate that? This is something that I'm grappling with at the moment, that we're starting to bed into some of our programs. Indeed, I'm embedding it into some of my own teaching currently. And one of the key aspects is that knowledge and experience of the challenges of the topic of sustainability is key to supporting people around the wheel of emotion, but even helping them understand that there is a wheel of emotion. By articulating it and articulating their emotions, that can help. One of the biggest challenges in this space is that sustainability as a topic, which you've just seen is actually incredibly broad, has historically been left to STEM subjects. And this is particularly still the case at schools. It's often only considered in a discipline way within geography and biology. And it can often be viewed in a very environmental way, even though the topic itself is hugely broad and every discipline needs to engage with it. This can also lead to a bit of a fact and data-driven approach. There's a very big tendency to provide a lot of facts or data that can scare people, but actually neglects the need to enable your audience to find a way to connect meaningfully to the topics, or to have the tools to cope with their feelings and emotions in response to it. And that's particularly key. So often sustainability education moves into this realm and tries to use the model more of head, hands, heart. And I'll be honest, at the moment, often what happens is you find people will provide the head, so they'll provide the intellectual engagement and the knowledge. We're often pretty good at providing the practical action, so the solutions, what can people do or what is being done, but neglecting that heart bit at the top. The heart is what will make the connection between the head and the hands. And that's really, really crucial. Here I've just got some practical tips that you could think about if you are engaging people in sustainability, providing training in this space, even thinking about the strategies and plans that you're putting into place. Think about people in those meeting spaces. How are they feeling? How will we actually get change to happen? So consider your audience. Where are they coming from? How are they feeling today? Create a safe and open space without judgment. And I think that's key. Normalizing those different emotions. It is okay to sometimes feel apathetic about this, or sometimes you will feel angry, sometimes you'll be upset. Everyone will have different emotions. A particular way to support people is to share stories of individuals and communities and how they are activating for change to bring some positivity and hope. And the book I've included here, Children of the Anthropocene, is one beautifully crafted around stories of young people, stories of people impacted by climate change, but it also very clearly includes a manifesto for change and action. So that's really doing a good job of capturing the emotion, but also providing the hope and the solutions. Using reflective exercises can be very good. Explore areas and emotions through creative practice, so storytelling, poetry, painting, and letter writing. Sometimes we persuade people through emotion, not through facts and figures. Take your teaching or your training outside. Take your meetings outside. We all feel better if it's a nice day being outside. It enables greater connection with the natural world. I've already mentioned the need to include positive stories and hope. I mean, this can be done through even things such as music can change everyone's mood. So think about sometimes how you can change the space that you're in. Empower your students, give them agency and very clear ways that they can contribute to making change. You've got to emphasize the need for collective action. I wanted to just share a video here which will hopefully kind of capture some of these emotions and show you how we can engage with storytelling. And this is Bella Lack, who is the author of the book that I just mentioned. So I'm going to just check that this will work. Okay.
I began doing activism when I was about 11 or 12. And the actions I took then were sort of what you would consider for a stereotypical activist. It was very much out protesting in the street with a placard, trying to convince people of my message. And although that's still important to me, I learned the importance of storytelling. I began to understand a few years ago how humans are creatures of stories, and if we want to move towards a more ethical and sustainable future, we need to be able to imagine a world where we value compassion and community and nature over consumption and growth. And I think that people often say about the environmental movement there needs to be less talking and more acting. And whilst I agree there needs to be more action, I think that the moment the talking stops, the action stops. So I say keep talking, keep acting, and imagine as well. Imagine that amazing future, incredible future that we could move towards, because environmentalism isn't all about sacrifices, it's about creating a new world for all of us. I often get asked, how do we keep an intergenerational dialogue going and then turn that into collective action? Or even how do we start an intergenerational dialogue? And I think the most important thing, which actually very amazingly I have seen happening quite recently, is young people being involved, young people being given a seat at the table. And I don't mean a tokenistic sort of, we have one young person involved in our charity as an ambassador, but actually asking young people their opinions, getting a group or a school in, and engaging in dialogue with them rather than just telling them that they need to take action. Young people care passionately, and yes, they're anxious about the future, but most importantly, young people have very strong opinions and very strong ideas about what needs to be done and how we can get there. And I think completely overlooking all those opinions and views of this massive demographic, one of the biggest demographics in the world, young people, is hugely damaging.
Oh.
One important question I get a lot is, you're young, why would you decide to give up sort of your youth and your childhood to commit to this? And I think the most important thing is to remember this isn't a passion. Activism isn't the passion of young people. I didn't wake up one day and decide that I wanted to be an activist and I wanted to do campaigning. It was more a deep-rooted love of the natural world, but more importantly, a recognition that all of our futures, not just young people, everyone on earth, and their future is at stake, but especially the demographic of young people, and in different locations around the world, people are already being threatened by the climate and environmental crisis. And so I think it's that recognition of the reality of what our futures will hold and the impending devastation if we don't take action. And I know this has caused what's being labelled eco-anxiety for many young people, which is sort of just anxiety around the reality of what's happening and what's going to happen. And to stay grounded and to stay motivated and passionate, I would say, go out into nature and enjoy the thing that you're trying to protect and do what young people are meant to do, you know, have fun with your friends, go out, because you have to keep some semblance of sanity, because this environmental fight isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and we need to be in it for the long run. my message to everyone listening is we need large-scale systemic change, yes, but that doesn't diminish the power of the individual, because when individual actions accumulate, they have a huge impact on political and economic and social structures. So don't forget your individual power as a consumer, as a citizen, as a voter, and also don't forget the importance of community. No one can do this alone. And don't forget the importance of speaking up as loudly as you can, but also listening, because I think it's so important to always be willing to change your mind if the evidence presents itself.
Oh, apologies. Always a challenge when you include a video. So one of the reasons I included that video was because I think videos, music, hearing from the individuals themselves is a really powerful tool. We feel very differently, for example, hearing from Bella than me telling you with a PowerPoint slide. And I think that's really important and something to acknowledge. The next little bit here, I'm very aware of time, I just want to touch on is that climate emotion is also something we should consider for the educators themselves, for the people who are being asked to train or talk about these things on a daily basis. There's a high level of eco-anxiety and emotion and burnout in educators in this space. It's a huge emotional labor. And often you're navigating controversy, trying to find the hope whilst also seeing a lot of the despair. And also you have a real sense of urgency sometimes in the face of what are, of course, a lot of restrictions that may be in place, just within organizations, within institutions. How do we rapidly make change? So some of the things that educators can do are to, again, acknowledge and normalize emotions, both in your classroom, but in yourself, and realize that that's okay. Reflective practice, self-care, as Bella herself said, go for a walk, go and re-engage with nature. Focus on positive action and create yourself support networks of people going through similar, and try and create a balanced learning experience that will help you as much as helping students or the people that you're training. The last thing I want to touch on briefly is thinking more about enabling individual behaviour change, the power of people, the sort of educational changes that we want to make at the smaller scale. So what practical changes can we make? So this is beyond the classroom. When we act in this space, we're often people that are inspiring change or action, which could be in our students, our colleagues, our family, and our friends. As researchers, we might be informing policymakers, providing data to actually inform evidence-based policy change. We often might be engaging in public discourse, collaborating with industry, non-governmental organisations and international bodies. We often do approach that still in a very head-to-hands way. But don't forget that the heart's also really important when we're trying to make change and have conversations in other spaces as well. Here I've put some of the drivers of behaviour change. Fundamentally, success to any individual is the ability to survive and pass on genes to the next generation. Personality differences can drive behaviour choices and changes that are made. The immediate sensory information received, so sight, smell, touch, sound, can have an important factor. Social and environmental cues, group members, including kin or your relatives, whether you have leaders or followers, the climate you're experiencing, what resources are available to you and your habitat. Learning and experience. What have you learned from others? What was your social learning environment? What have you learned through trial and error? What are potentially conditioned responses? Neurological and hormonal factors make a difference in terms of what behaviour choices we make. dopamine levels, reward-seeking behavior, and then cortisol levels and stress and the amount of risk-taking we're willing to do. Also considering the trade-offs, that balance of risk versus reward. Energy expenditure, how much energy are you going to expend based on the reward you get? You may be thinking that the way these are phrased is very biological, and you'd be right. This is exactly how I frame animal behavior choices. These are no different, though, to how we often make choices, because we should never forget that fundamentally we are making our choices based on these sorts of inputs. Obviously, though, social decision-making in humans is more complex. People are often driven by habit, though, convenience, social norms. We need to think about what is causing variation in individual motivation. What are the systemic barriers to sustainability as well? And I pull on here some work by colleagues actually in the School of Psychology at Birmingham that I've embedded in one of our training courses, looking at the role of motivation in pro-environmental behaviours. So what are some of the things we need to think about? The law of least effort. When you're trying to make change in sustainability spaces, you need to try and keep personal costs low in relation to the perceived environmental benefit. Nudge behaviour is really important. What is the default option for something? If the default option is more sustainable, people are more likely to choose it. Social proof. Think about how much the community plays a role. Priming people for changes that might come. What are some of the small incentives? I mean, I'm sure you can all think of examples. The 25p off your coffee if you use a reusable cup. All these little changes and nudges shouldn't restrict freedom, though, and they should be transparent. It should be about empowering people to make good choices, not manipulating them. A really interesting one case was where the standard milk has been switched to a non-dairy option, and interestingly, more people consciously then chose the dairy option rather than the default. So we do have to test these out and see how they work. Behaviour change and regulatory change are often also needed in combination. So we can't just sweep in and make a big regulatory change without setting the tone first and making those small behaviour changes so that the actual large change doesn't feel so dramatic. We can think back here, single-use plastic bag use in the UK is one of these. That was a very gradual change in process, going from charging a small amount, then eventually removing them. And even now we're in a space where the more expensive bags are not often available, but it's all happened gradually. So behaviourally, it hasn't felt like a shock to us. So these are some of the things we should think about when we're looking at behaviour change. Just a final few examples of things we're doing here at the university in terms of trying to engage people in these spaces and nudge behaviour or consider how to make behaviour change. One is often about giving individuals an outlet, give them a mechanism to make change, empower them to make change. We, for example, have Sustainability Champions, which is a community across our staff and students where they can support and develop their own projects to make change, but also support wider action at the university and be a real voice in this space. Emphasize the need for small action, not perfection. To me, that's key. You're not asking every member of an organisation to be perfect. That's not possible. And if you try and get people to work towards that, there'll be more failure. It's thinking about small change. Thinking about things such as signage. What's your default option for printing? How do people report water leaks? Is it easy? Make it easy for them. The importance of leaders and role models is key. People have to see that the leadership is also making the change and supporting the change. Having very clear goals and incentives for people. We have work here going on around green goals and what they're going to be for the university, but also there's a lot of encouragement now to have a green lab, and there's incentives because it's linked to sources of funding. Recognition of success, awarding people. The Green Impact Awards at the university, which a lot of organisations can also partake in, have exploded in the last 2 years. We went from something like 10 teams to 50 teams to now over 200 teams taking part in Green Impact Awards. Having a collaborative culture and empowering individuals. That's the key thing here. How we do that, and also consider how you tap into emotion to make those changes. Hopefully this has been a little bit of an oversight of some of the things to consider when you're educating in this space, to consider when you're trying to make change in an organisation, and how we can encourage that. I think now we move over to questions and answers. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Julia. That's a fantastic